The U.S. government, because of corporate influence, has showed itself to be incapable of passing legislation on the basis of evidence or the public interest. So I am a pediatrician. I practiced for 15 years in Maryland, and throughout that 15 years, I was really frustrated with the way that I was being pushed more and more into seeing more patients, spending less time with them, losing families that I really had a great relationship with because their employer changed their insurance company, seeing that it wasn't about health insurance companies were not making decisions based on patients' needs or health. They were making them based on what they could get away with. And so I got involved at the state level with health reform, and when health reform came to the national level, we knew it in 2008 that it was coming there. I decided that because I lived in Maryland, so close to DC, that I wanted to get involved at the national level too, and that this was a real opportunity. I was very excited. I was like, wow, we can finally talk about this and tackle our healthcare problems. We have all the data, we know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are. And I was part of a coalition that represented 20 million people. It was labor, physicians, nurses, faith groups, community groups. And we were shut out of the debate. And it was, I served as congressional fellow for Physicians for National Health Program. And I was in Congress almost every day during 2009, 2010, doing everything that we could do, lobbying, holding briefings, getting arrested if I needed to, holding rallies if we needed to, testifying. And I saw very closely that the health reform process was not about health. It was not, well, there's a British medical journal called The Lancet, and in December of 2009, the cover of this magazine had a quote on it, and it said, "The U.S. government, because of corporate influence, has showed itself to be incapable of passing legislation on the basis of evidence or the public interest." Incapable because of corporate interest to pass legislation on the basis of evidence or the public interest. How clear can that be? And that's exactly what we saw. So, so we continued fighting after the bill was passed, going to states and meeting with state groups and doing events and trying to talk about how do we move forward. And there was a lot of energy at the state level to try to pass a single-payer health system at the state level. And people kept saying, well, how are we going to get single-payer? And it became clearer and clearer that each of us that advocate for peace, for social or economic or environmental justice runs up against the same obstacle. It's the corporate control of our political process, the corporate control of the media message. And that if we work on single issue kind of politics, none of us have the strength to overcome that corporate power. But that actually, if we joined ourselves together and fought strategically and with intention to weaken this corporate stranglehold, we might have a chance of being successful.
Yeah.
So, and health is not just about access to health care. To be honest, I'm here because I want health for everybody. And 10% of our health is due to access to health care, but the other 90% has to do with things like, do you have an education? Do you have a home to live in? Are you in an area that's free of violence? Do you have clean water to drink? Do you have a job with a living wage? All of these issues are connected to our health. So if we want to have a healthy population, we need to address them. So in December of 2010, the Veterans for Peace and some other organizations were organizing an action in front of the White House to protest the war in Afghanistan. And a friend of mine, Chris Hedges, called and he said, will you be my, I'm going to get arrested, will you be my jail support? And I said, sure, I'll be your jail support. And then like a week later, I called him back and I said, I don't want to be your jail support. I want to stand with you because I've been talking about joining the movements and now I need to show people what that looks like. So they allowed me to speak at the rally, and we did this beautiful action on a Thursday. It was snowing. Hundreds of people were there. 131 of us were arrested. Dan Ellsberg was there. Ray McGovern was there. Not a blip in the news. And after that, we met again a few weeks later, a bunch of us in New York. And we just said we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to stand in front of the White House. We don't want to do symbolic actions. We've been doing symbolic actions. People have been doing rallies on weekends in DC for years, and they mean nothing. We have to do something. So, so actually, we went to, we kept meeting, and in March, a group of us went to Madison, because we were so inspired by what was happening there. We met with organizers there to find out, you know, how they were organizing, and that was really exciting. And so we organized an action in New York City in April, and it was actually Bank of America. We did it on tax day, and we targeted Bank of America for not paying taxes, and we had a short rally in Union Square Park, and then hundreds of us marched over and did a picket outside of Bank of America, and a few of us had decided to go inside. We hadn't really done training for arrest and things, so 5 of us decided we were going to go inside the bank and take in. We made this cardboard town of what we would like the money to be used for, and it said like military recruiting center closed, green jobs training around the back, you know, and daycare and public education, public libraries, all these things. And we wanted to go in and set up our town in the lobby. And as soon as we went through the doors, like, all these people followed us, and we ended up taking over the lobby of the Bank of America and holding a rally in there for like 2 hours. We had guitars and music, and we were giving speeches, and the police are laughing. This was like, they didn't know what was going on. We didn't know this was going to happen. So the energy was really high, and so we thought, well, you know, now we need to do this on a national level. One of the things that was important about this rally was we brought together 17 different organizations that had not worked together before, that were very different, like Harlem Fight Back, and there was a mothers organization and peace organizations and different types of groups. So we wanted to do that on a national level. So that's when we started organizing the occupation of Freedom Plaza. We called it at that time October 2011 because we were following the model that we were seeing in Europe of the Egyptians' April 6th movement and the Spaniards' May 15th. And so we, for 6 months, were organizing that occupation of Freedom Plaza. And when Occupy Wall Street was announced in July, that was like great, because we kept getting this sense when we talked to other groups about what we were planning, everybody was feeling the same way. So it seemed like there was kind of this energy in the air. People were ready to do something different. And then, you know, Occupy Wall Street took off, and things took off nationally, and that was really exciting. But what I wanted to share with you was kind of during those 6 months of planning, it was really literally a 24-hour, felt like every waking moment job. We did a lot of workshopping and thinking about and reading about how do we shift power in this country? How are we actually going to make a change? And part of the materials that we studied were the Gene Sharp materials. Are you guys familiar with the Albert Einstein, Einstein.org? So Gene Sharp has From Dictatorship to Democracy, and then Robert Helvey wrote On Strategic Nonviolent Conflict. And those are both not very long books that are helpful. So we called the action in Freedom Plaza Stop the Machine and Create a New World, because we felt that there's 2 kind of basic components. We want to stop what's going on here, but at the same time we need to build alternative structures so that we have something to replace what we're trying to bring down. So it's kind of like this. So it's important to have a vision, because we need to kind of know, we don't have to be united in everything, but we have to be kind of united in where we're going. And so for us, what it kind of boiled down to was end corporate rule and shift power to the people. So if we kind of take that as an overall vision, underneath that it's important to have what's called the grand strategy. And the grand strategy is stop the machine, create a new world. It's both resistance and creation. Underneath that grand strategy, there are so many different tactics, and that's the beauty of it, is that as long as people are keeping that vision in mind and kind of that grand strategy in mind, there's a lot of room for creativity, a lot of room for various tactics. And I wanted to kind of run through with you some of the exercises that we would do on Freedom Plaza, because what Gene Sharp writes about is he says that power structures are held up by nine different pillars. Have you guys heard this before? So the different pillars are police, military, civil servants, it's business, workers, organizations and non-governmental organizations. And before I get there, we really see this as a long-term struggle. How many of you are familiar with the Powell memos from August of 1971? Has anybody heard of? Okay.
Powell?
Powell, P-O-W-E-L-L. Lewis Powell. Lewis Powell was a tobacco lobbyist from Virginia who was part of his Chamber of Commerce. And in August of 1971, he wrote an internal memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce outlining, well, think about 1971. You've got the anti-war movement, you've got the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, you've got Weather Underground, blowing up banks. The people that support a free market ideology actually felt that there was a war going on against them. And they decided that they needed to create a strategy to fight back. And that's what the Lewis Powell memo did. It outlined a plan to take back media, to create think tanks. It's where ALEC came from, to take over education. They increased the number of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. dramatically. It was funded by a lot of big corporations and wealthy people. Shortly after the Powell memo was released, there was a meeting of, I think AT&T was there, CBS, and GE, and some other corporations that met on how are we going to put this into play. And that's where the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation came from, and all these, they've been very successful, right? They've corporatized the media, they've corporatized education, they've corporatized pretty much everything. So we have to have our plan. We have to see this as a long-term effort of how do we undo that. And so with that long-term vision in mind, we believe the focus right now needs to be on movement building and on education. And that within this current power structure, with this power imbalance, attempts at electoral or legislative strategies are not going to be sufficient. And so we need to think about, at some point down the road, they will be, and maybe for some small things like local offices or there are some changes that could be made. But overall, if we want to get real change, we've got to boil it down to what are the fundamental problems and how do we shift that power wave. So anyway, they talk about these 9 pillars. And that what our job to do is to actually weaken those pillars and bring the people in those different institutions or groups into the side of the movement. Because there's a good book that just came out called Why Civil Resistance Works. And it basically it looks at the research of the last 100 years and of movements that have shifted power. And they found that nonviolent movements are successful twice as often or more than violent movements. And that the nonviolent movements that became mass movements were the ones that were succeeded. So we want to bring people into the movement.
What was the name of the book again?
And it's called Why Civil Resistance Works. And I'm blanking, it's Maria Stefan, I think it's S-T-E-F-A-N.
Stefan?
Stefani, it's something, I'm blanking, and Edith, I want to say.
Who's got a computer can Google it.
It's got a great picture of a fist on the front with a peace sign coming out. Anyway, so when we were in Freedom Plaza, we kind of put this philosophy into play. And so when we actually talked to the police quite frequently. And each night before we went to bed, my partner Kevin and I used to go kind of hang out on the perimeter where the police were, and we would chat with them. And we told them why we were there. And we'd say, we know you're not the 1%. And we knew that their pensions had been cut, that their salaries had been cut so that they could hold on to their health benefits. And they were forced to work overtime. So they're not in a really good situation. And actually, the Metropolitan Police in D.C. were very supportive of us and refused to arrest us a number of times when they were asked to arrest us. So much so that actually they stopped sending the MPD to our actions and they started sending Department of Homeland Security instead. We know that we're not going to, when it comes down to it, the police are doing a job. If they're ordered to be violent against us, they may be violent against us. We don't have to bring all the police on our side, but what the goal is to start to create some division within them. And we saw this in New York when they did one of their marches early on, and you saw the young women that were kettled in the orange plastic barrier. and a white shirted officer, Tony Baloney, he came by and just pepper sprayed them. They weren't doing anything. And he pepper sprayed them. And one of the blue shirt officers, you could hear him on the video, said, "I can't believe he just did that." Right there, you're causing division within the police. If those women had been shouting pig or cussing or throwing things at the police, the blue shirt officer might not have felt that way. He might have been like, "Oh, get them." But because they were doing nothing and they were mistreated, it started to cause some division. We've seen some great stuff in the military with Occupy Marines and Occupy Army and people who are saying that, we didn't go abroad to fight for people in our country so that then they could be abused here. Civil servants, we had a really fun campaign going called Whistleblower Wednesday, where we worked with some whistleblowers, and every Wednesday we would march to a federal agency at lunchtime and blow our whistles, and we'd say, hey, no fear, you can blow the whistle because we're here, because there's actually a law called the No Fear Act, which is supposed to help protect whistleblowers, and you probably know that President Obama is waging a war on whistleblowers right now. And we include Bradley Manning in there, he's an alleged whistleblower. We would go with cards and hand them out to these governmental employees as they were coming in and out of the building with information. Basically, it said, exposing fraud and corruption is a patriotic thing to do, and you can do it either anonymously through these various avenues, or you can do it with the support of whistleblower organizations. And actually, one of the whistleblowers that we work with recently told me that there's so many employees trying to blow the whistle, they're like contacting CNN, and the media outlets are not covering them because there's just too many of them. So trying to work on a way to give them some more coverage for their whistleblowing. Don't know if you want to, what we would do in Freedom Plaza on Saturday afternoons, we would often hold these community discussions, and we would take one of these and we would just brainstorm on, like, what would you do? What are some concrete things that could be done to weaken any of these pillars? And do you have any interest in doing that tonight?
Sure.
Okay, all right. So, did you want to pick one? Is there somebody yell out one? If there's. Sure, Diane.
Military, near and dear to my heart. I served 22 years in the Army. I'm a veteran for peace. And yes, thank you. And I was so thrilled when the military stepped in and came to the defense of the occupiers who were being brutalized by the police. And when they were challenged by the police, they said, and this is paraphrasing, they said, "I took an oath to defend the Constitution, not some figureheads." You better believe it.
Yeah, that's great. And you probably know about the Veterans Peace Team. Have you guys heard about the Veterans Peace Team?
Yes. I'm part of it.
Me too. I'm a member. I'll be in Chicago. The Veterans for Peace have created a peace team, and this is similar to, if you think about Gandhi had the peace brigades. He said we should have armies trained in peace, just like we have armies trained in war. And so the Veterans Peace Teams are people who are deeply committed to nonviolence and who are willing to stand between the police and protesters during actions to maintain a wall of nonviolence. And so they did May Day. They marched with the people in Occupy Wall Street.
I was going to say religious. We've got a lot of congregations around here, and most of them are looking at us from a bit of a distance. And yet, I think they're available. They're part of the 99%.
So if we have time, we could do too. Yeah. And I also wanted to mention that when we were organizing Freedom Plaza, what we were hoping that it would be is that we're hoping that it would be a first step towards creating an independent movement that's broad-based and that's nonviolent to work for transformation of our system. And we said we want to work for a world that's peaceful, just, and sustainable. Was kind of those were the goals.
Can you repeat that?
So
Can you repeat that? Independent?
Independent, broad-based, nonviolent, working for transformation. We're not about reforming the system. We're about transforming the system to a more participatory democracy, to something where, and a big piece of this is the economic piece, is closing the wealth divide. Because you can't have democracy in a situation where there's such a wealth inequality. And Gar Alperovitz writes about this in his book, America Beyond Capitalism, is another book I highly recommend. And so creating democratized economic structures because the political system often follows the economic system, is going to be a way to really shift power. And so that's the create a new world part. And that's why it's really exciting to see the public banking movement's taking off. The participatory budgeting movement is taking off. There are more local currencies and time banks. There's this push for the Robin Hood tax that's going on now. In Alaska, they invest in oil drilling there. And the Alaskan state has the Alaska Permanent Trust, which requires that a portion of the profits from that be given to the people of Alaska. So instead of corporate welfare, we could have taxpayer investment, where we invest in a new green energy economy, and then any profits that come from that would be distributed amongst the people, amongst the taxpayers, so that it almost could bring us to like a guaranteed national, income, which has been shown. They did it in Manitoba in Canada, was shown to be very successful. So there are a lot of models. For every crisis that we face right now in this country, there are evidence-based solutions that could solve these problems. And when we did the research, I'm getting off topic, but we looked at polling data around 7 key areas and found that supermajorities of Americans already supported positions that Congress was going in the complete opposite direction in. So things like closing military bases and bringing the troops home, preserving and strengthening Social Security, Medicare for all, workers' rights, ending corporate welfare, creating clean elections, developing a green economy. These are things that the supermajorities of Americans already support. And so I loved it. I heard earlier, and it was a message that we had, we're not looking to our leaders to solve our problems. We don't have time to look to our leaders to solve our problems. We have to start coming together in our communities and solving our problems together.
I noticed that among the 9, the word politicians isn't up there.
Yeah.
And it seems that most of how our so-called advocacy organizations work is that they try to pressure politicians directly. They call it lobbying.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to work that well.
Exactly.
So I was wondering, like, what you
Great
thought?
point. I mean, that's one of the reasons I occupy. Those traditional tools of democracy that we used don't work anymore. Until we shift the power, these types of things are not going to work. And that's why this election cycle, it would be great if we could show that the conversations that are happening amongst the candidates, those are false conversations. They're speaking within a restricted range of what their corporate funders allow them to say. And that the true conversations, the real conversations about the issues and the solutions are happening in the communities. We held our own super committee hearing in Freedom Plaza in November. The super committee is 12 people that were given, 6 from the Senate, 6 from the House, given the power to come up with budget recommendations that were supposed to go to Congress for an up or down vote only. No amendments, no discussion. Talk about, usurping a democratic process. So we had our own super committee hearing. We brought in experts, and we told them, you're free here in Freedom Plaza. We were the liberated super committee to talk about real solutions. If you could address these problems in any way, what would you do? And we called the super committee in Congress the occupied super committee. We said they were occupied by corporate power. So, and out of that, we created a deficit proposal that would actually raise the $1.2 trillion that Congress was trying to raise in 10 years in just 2 years by creating progressive taxes on the wealthy and financial transactions taxes and things like that. Simply going back to tax levels that we had in the 60s and 70s and 80s.